The snap that saved the universe was supposed to be Tony Stark's final play. But what if the gamma radiation didn't kill him? What if the Earth's greatest defender actually survived Endgame? This rewrites the DNA of the Multiverse Saga. Spider-Man never has his identity revealed, the government never gets its hands on damage control, and the looming threat of the multiverse? It doesn't face a divided, scattered team of heroes. Today, we're breaking down the massive butterfly effect of Tony Stark's survival and how that reshapes the Multiverse Saga and sets up Earth going into Doomsday. Tony's goals. Firstly, I think Tony would be out of commission for quite a while. We have seen this with the Hulk. Using the gauntlet would likely put him in recovery for a long while, most probably in a comatose state. When Tony does eventually awake, he will need some time with his family before he is able to figure out what his next steps are. And what would those be? I think they're going to be rooted in what we've already seen. Tony always had the opinion that the real problem was outer space. And after Thanos, that's not an opinion. It's 2 movies worth of tried and tested experience. I think that regardless of whether or not he survives, Tony's time as Iron Man is done. He'd be busy raising Morgan and just cherishing the life he came so close to losing. But Tony has never been one for the quiet. Even without his suits, Tony stands at the helm of the world's biggest tech giant. Plus, his public reputation would be through the roof, having saved the entire universe. What would Tony do with all that? He would start raising the next generation of heroes, and he would start with the one he knows best, Peter Parker. Spider-Man still at home. In a world where Tony Stark is alive, Quentin Beck never becomes a problem. He was a salty Stark employee, and honestly, there's a debate there about him being validly upset. But his lie collapses immediately. There is no interdimensional hero or elementals. It's an ex-Stark employee and Stark tech, both of which Tony would immediately recognize. And let's assume Mysterio doesn't lose his credibility. It's his word against the savior of the universe. As we discussed earlier, Tony would essentially be the living legend of Earth. He brought down Thanos, and he already had a stellar reputation before that. He is Earth's knight in shining armor, and a beacon of morality we haven't seen since the likes of Steve Rogers. Let's talk about the deeper implications for Peter, though. He no longer has successor anxiety because he isn't filling in Tony's massive shoes anymore.
So the world needs the next Iron Man, and it's not gonna be me. I mean, I'm a 16-year-old kid from Queens. It needs to be an adult.
That means that going into Far From Home, he is actually a lot more stable. He has Tony to rely on as a mentor to guide him, and who better to take Avenger tips from than the guy who's the official boss? Speaking of the boss, I think Steve Rogers would still be gone. The end of Steve's arc in the MCU was always going to be choosing a life for himself, retiring Captain America so that Steve Rogers could live, and I don't see that changing, with or without Tony. In fact, I think that he would be even more ready to leave knowing that Tony is still there to keep things stable. But let's get back to Peter, because I actually think the implications for his story are massive. Since Pete's got a support system to fall back on, I think the events of No Way Home go a lot differently too. For one, there may not even be any multiversal villains or alternate Spider-Men. Think about it. The entire reason all of that happened was due to Peter's identity getting revealed at the end of Far From Home.
Spider-Man's name is Peter Parker.
If Quentin Beck never really manages to become a proper threat like he was in that movie, then he also never ends up revealing Spider-Man's identity. And so, Peter has no reason to seek out Strange and cast the spell. Besides, Quentin's entire motivation was revenge against Tony. If he's still alive, then Tony becomes his primary target, not Peter. Let's assume, for example, his identity does get revealed, right? Peter would have all of Tony's resources at his side. A dozen deepfakes of Quentin confessing to lying about who Spidey is? Done. The world's best lawyers? On speed dial.
I'm a really good lawyer.
He might not even need to do all that because Tony's AI, Friday, might instantly just take down the video or throttle the servers hosting it. Far From Home and No Way Home may straight up just not happen if Tony lives. And if those don't happen, then, well, Brand New Day doesn't happen either. Spider-Man 2, 3, and 4 would instead be about how Peter is now the face of the Avengers with Tony at his back, facing new threats entirely. Riri and Tony. I also don't think Peter is the only apprentice Tony would take. Tony Stark's whole MO is preventative measures. That's what got us Ultron after all.
This could be it, Bruce. This could be the key to creating Ultron.
I think that this part of his personality wouldn't change, and instead of just sitting back and retiring, he would take on a mentor role and try to cultivate the next generation of heroes. But besides Peter, his protege, who else could he take on as a student? Riri Williams. Think about it. How did Peter find Tony? He was scouting for people, and there's just no way he would miss out on a 19-year-old genius at MIT who reverse engineered his own armor. In this what-if timeline, Riri wouldn't be working out of a garage or taking notes in Shuri's lab. She would be learning alongside the world's premier tech genius in a state-of-the-art Stark Industries facility. That's a massive upgrade for her, and it could really set her up as the successor to Iron Man. I don't think Tony would miss out on the opportunity to have somebody replace him, especially if, by some miracle, a girl who has his talent with engineering shows up. How would he find her? Well, there's a lot of ways, but I actually think Tony's relationship with MIT would come into play here. In Civil War, Tony funded every single student project at MIT through the September Foundation.
All of your projects have just been approved and funded.
The moment an undergrad submitted a design for a machine capable of tracking the rarest, most dangerous metal on Earth, Friday would likely flag it, and Tony would intercept the project before Riri's professor ever got the chance to hand the blueprints over to the CIA. That's, in my opinion, the most likely scenario for Tony discovering Riri. But here's where some of the negative consequences of Tony surviving would come into play. You see, if the CIA never gets their hands on the detector, then they never encroach on Talokan's borders, and Namor stays isolated. Meaning he also never attacks Wakanda and kills Queen Ramonda, meaning Shuri never suffers that second devastating loss and takes her time to grieve T'Challa's passing. Without that external catalyst that pushes her to become the Black Panther and recreate the heart-shaped herb, I think the world is left without a Black Panther. I also feel like that at this point, Tony would have enough political power as well, as the savior of the universe, that he wouldn't really let Fisk and his brutal crusade against vigilantes continue. But we all know that Daredevil has always been its own corner of the MCU, separate from all the larger stuff. People don't consider just how much Tony's resources helped the MCU do, well, everything. For example, let's take Hawkeye. Do you really think Tony wouldn't be able to find out who's going around dressed as the Ronin when Clint is out of the picture, or quickly pick up on the fact that it's been listed at a black market auction? He's got the best surveillance tech on the planet. I also think that Tony would actually recruit Kate Bishop too, because there's no way he's passing up on a Hawkeye replacement when the OG has retired and he's actively looking to achieve his long-term goal of global peace. Department of Damage Control. If Tony Stark is alive, we don't just see changes at the Avengers level. The street-level MCU completely transforms, and it starts with the Department of Damage Control. Remember, Tony founded Damage Control back in Homecoming to clean up alien debris. It was a janitorial service. But after Endgame, the government weaponized it, using repurposed Stark drones to hunt down unregistered kids like Kamala Khan. There is absolutely no reality where a living Tony Stark watches a federal agent use his company's logo to fire a missile at a teenager in New Jersey. Tony has always hated bureaucrats playing with his toys, so he doesn't write his congressman, he initiates a hostile takeover. Imagine this scene. Agent Deaver is about to order the strike on Kamala, but suddenly, every single Edith drone powers down and drops out of the sky. The agent's earpieces crackle with static, and the voice of Friday calmly informs them that their Stark-contracted servers have been permanently locked. In a single afternoon, Tony buys out the government contracts, fires the rogue directors, and brings Damage Control strictly under Stark Industries' internal oversight. Because of this, characters like Ms. Marvel and She-Hulk never face that government persecution. Kamala's origin story becomes a lot less traumatic, and she likely gets fast-tracked into a Stark internship. WandaVision. Now, this is where it gets really rough. Tony would definitely not sit back and let the events of WandaVision happen. You see, the thing is, that whole show was about Wanda grieving the loss of her family and going off the deep end. I know that things were resolved between her and Tony since she joined the Avengers, but again, she was really unstable, and what gave her the first loss of her life? A Stark Industries missile. They also share one massive common denominator: Vision. In the main timeline, a grieving Wanda goes to SWORD headquarters and finds Director Hayward dismantling Vision's corpse to build a sentient weapon. But if Tony's alive, then that probably doesn't help. There's zero chance he lets SWORD dismantle not only his most complex AI creation, but a fellow Avenger. He could literally claim it as Stark's intellectual property, bulldoze Hayward in court, and take Vision's body back to his own lab. But here's where things get worse for Wanda. I think Tony would try to fix Vision and treat Wanda like a grieving widow, but he'd inevitably fail. Without the Mind Stone, there is no Vision. We already saw what this scenario looks like. White Vision is a machine without the warmth, memories, or soul of the man Wanda loved. And that is just heartbreak for Wanda all over again. She would still flee to Westview, New Jersey, and there would still be an explosion of chaos magic. I don't think there's anything Tony can do to stop this, because it was literally just too sudden and unpredictable. But the response to the Westview anomaly actually doesn't change much. I don't think Tony has a single thing, a piece of tech capable of dealing with chaos magic or Wanda's power, but what I do think will happen is that Tony is going to pick up on the CMBR radiation from Wanda's magic, and that's going to lead him to discover the cracks in reality caused by incursions, or at least alert him to the idea that there might be more outside of this universe, and then he would panic. After surviving the snap and taking down the universe's biggest enemy, Tony would definitely dedicate the rest of his life to protecting Earth from other threats. But it's like Nick Fury said.
You think you're the only superhero in the world? Mr. Stark, you become part of a bigger universe. You just don't know it yet.
In the year that follows between WandaVision and Multiverse of Madness, Tony would double down on making a new Avengers initiative and gathering heroes wherever he could find them. And it would be proven totally right when eventually he finds out that his theory from WandaVision was right. Doctor Strange confirms the existence of other universes. And then, during Multiverse of Madness, he would truly become exposed to just how vast that universe is. The knowledge that there's a universe out there that defeated Thanos without the massive sacrifices that Tony's world made would be a big shock to him. I think he would try his best to help the Illuminati against Wanda and assist Strange, but I think she would still end up killing everyone she did in the movie. After becoming aware of the multiverse, he would also learn about America Chavez, and immediately he would recognize the extreme potential in a girl who can freely travel the multiverse. He would essentially become the leading authority on global security, and who could tell him otherwise? He is literally the reason Earth is still standing. He'd also inevitably run into Valentina Allegra de Fontaine, who had been operating in the shadows, creating the Thunderbolts. But Tony Stark is also one of the few people who could simply buy the Thunderbolts out from under her, turning them into Stark Industries' own private covert ops squad. Ever since the Westview anomaly, Tony's sensors have been picking up dimensional anomalies. He knows reality is cracking. He forms the Illuminati with Doctor Strange to monitor these multiversal incursions, but they are essentially flying blind. That is until 2026, when Scott Lang barely escapes the quantum realm. But here, I think Scott would go straight to the compound. Imagine a terrified Scott Lang sitting across from Tony Stark explaining that there's a man out there who has wiped out entire timelines, an infinite army of conquerors who view the multiverse as a playground. Thanos wiped out half a universe. We're talking about dozens now. Tony realizes his suit of armor around the world philosophy is completely useless if the universe itself gets deleted. And that leads us to Tony assembling Earth's mightiest heroes once again. Earth's mightiest defenders. Now that we've established that Tony is aggressively coming up with ways to prepare Earth for threats from the multiverse, we have to look at what he does with the kids, because Tony Stark's biggest fear was always leaving the world unprotected. I think Tony would push Peter into a leadership role for his new team, consisting of Spider-Man, Ms. Marvel, Kate Bishop, Ironheart, America Chavez, and Cassie Lang. But where does that leave the old guard? Thor, Hulk, Captain Marvel, Ant-Man, Sam Wilson, Shang-Chi, and the Thunderbolts. First things first, Tony formalizes the Earth 616 Illuminati. This includes all the old guard. He pulls Strange, Banner, Shuri, and even calls in Carol and Thor and tells them no more solo missions. He actively funds Camartage, combining his bleeding-edge technology with Strange's mystic arts. And for those of you who think sorcery and science don't go together, that's pretty much Doom's entire thing in the comics. He'd likely also reboot the Iron Legion, and this time, in collaboration with Wakanda, these would be vibranium-laced buster suits specifically designed to protect against alien threats. They would be way more powerful and durable than anything we have seen before. At the very least, I think Earth would be in a much better place going into Doomsday than it is right now. The heroes wouldn't be scattered, the different pillars of power like Wakanda and Camartage wouldn't be separated. Tony would unite every single person and resource on Earth under one banner, a multiversal war general, and he would have both the authority and the means to pull it off. Either way, we would be looking at a drastically different MCU. But that's just one possible future for the universe if Tony survives. The truth is, there's no telling what kind of world we would be looking at because the implications of Tony surviving are massive. T'Challa was the only person who could compete with him for influence, power, and money, and he was the literal king of Wakanda. The possibilities are endless. So what do you think would happen if Tony survived after Endgame?